Hi, everybody. This is another episode of Dodging Cancer, and we're going to do a little switcheroo on you. Um, I'm going to be asking the questions, and my skilled communicator friend, Tom Masty, is going to be answering. He is far more the expert, um, for better, for worse, a little bit for worse, and hopefully for better, on actually having cancer. He's, in tennis, they have the Grand Slam, and I don't know if he's quite hit that yet, but he has expertise which is hard fought, hard won, and he's a veteran of certain cancer chemotherapy wars, and and yet I have to say he maintains what do we call this, an equable disposition. Um, and kind of keeps the high road. And this speaks to his excellence as a communicator. He's a retired writer. Um, I think he's, frankly, he should unretire because he's so good. Um, but we'll get to that. So I want to introduce Tom again. He's probably been seen by our more experienced audience, but if you're new to our podcast, let me just take 1 second to backtrack. This is a project that Tom and I have been working on for a few months. It's called Dodging Cancer. We have a Facebook page and we have some videos up here and there. And the idea is to give people a sense of, some of the, not quite the good news behind cancer, but kind of like to temper some of the bad news at the very least. And it's not quite, put a smiley face on a dread illness, but it's to give rationality and reason and hope. And I think Tom actually has all of those qualities in abundance. And so we're going to tap into some of those, and hopefully he'll still have some left at the end after I finish annoying him by probing questions. So do you want to start with a quick intro? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your experiences.
Well, first, let me remind our audience that you're Dr. Randy Bach, and that you've been in medicine how many years now?
Oh gosh, well, let's see. What day is today? I've been a physician 40 years, and as far as practicing, I had my own practice for nearly 30 years in one place in one office, and right now I'm doing some medical writing, and I'm probably going to start doing some practice again.
Oh, that sounds great, and thank you for having doing this project with me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and frankly, my benefit, because I'm learning so much from you, and frankly through you. You're kind of a conduit, and just like with the cancer, you're a little bit of a lightning rod. So you've been able to absorb, some of the knowledge and pass it through, and I very much in your debt. And
I ask the annoying questions.
no, there's no such thing as a bad question unless it's, of course, it's misinformation. um, but No, I think they're only good questions. And so let me just, I'll focus a little bit. Let's start out. Can you tell me a little bit about your, I guess, grand slam of cancer, because you're a little bit of a veteran.
Yeah,
And why don't you just, maybe tell us what problems you've had, and how you came, how they came to you, or how you recognized them, and what were your thoughts?
sure, thanks. I've had two major types of cancer. The first was a chondroid sarcoma that was between C2 and 3 of the spinal column, between the cord and the column. And
And
I found,
just C means cervical. That's the neck.
yeah, so it's right at the top of the neck where you really don't want it. It makes it very difficult to remove. And at first they thought that it was just a ruptured disc, and they removed the tissue and it grew back. And the problem is that then to remove it, the spinal cord doesn't have the elasticity that you can pull it like you can in the middle of the back. And if you pull it too hard, it snaps and you're left with a quadriplegic. So that was kind of a scary one to go through. And I ended up with a 9.5 hour laminectomy surgery
Wow.
that was done. That the physician was the surgeon was absolutely unbelievable that the guy could do this, and he did it with Gamma knife, and he removed the cancer, and then he sent me off to Boston to Mass General for a summer of specialized proton beam radiation, which we'll talk about later what it does. But one side note that's kind of interesting is the proton accelerator there was donated to Mass General from Harvard, and they got it from the Manhattan Project. So it was
Oh
used
my
to
God.
create the atomic bomb. And so I tell people that the bomb saved me. But it wiped out the cancer back in about 2007. And the sarcoma has not returned. And it proves that good surgical technique and this specialized radiation can be successful. The other type of cancer I had was esophageal carcinoma. And that showed up and then disappeared, and no one knew why it disappeared. Only recently did I learn that that's not uncommon with esophageal cancer, that it'll show up and you start to treat it and the cells want to go elsewhere. And by the time people, if you're late in getting in to treat it, it looks like the cancer is gone when in fact it just went other places.
Wow.
And so about 2 years later, I showed up with two spots from on my lung, and fortunately they were close together. So they went in and did a little wedge resection and removed a little bit of lung. And they tested on the biopsy, and they were esophageal cells that were had been floating around my body from the esophageal cancer. And then they everything seemed fine for about another 2 years. And then a spot on the lower left lobe of my lung started to grow. And they went in and did a biopsy with bronchioscopy and found that that was also esophageal cells of carcinoma. And I'm getting ready to go through regular radiation with that. I've also done chemo following the first bout of the esophageal. So that's kind of my medical history on with cancer.
So that's an incredible story, and frankly, you look quite good. I imagine there's some worries throughout diagnosis. I actually have some prepared questions, but and I'll get to those in just a second. But um, how have you maintained your kind of mood and your outlook? Um, you seem quite put together. I understand that maybe beneath the surface there's some distraught and so forth, but maybe you could tell us how you tap in to be strong.
Well, I think that we had an Olympian that was on television. I was watching the other day, and she said she was from the Paralympics. She said you can't wait for life to get good to decide to be happy.
Wow.
And I thought it was a very powerful statement. I think that humor is something that you can tap into that keeps you in a more or less balanced, weird but balanced state. And it's a choice that you make. At the same time, I've also found that my brother suggested. He said, "What you need to do is become a sommelier. Sommelier is the word. The
Yes,
guys
the
who
wine, the
do
wine
drink the
guy.
wine. A sommelier of good memories and happy thoughts." And he said, "So you make a choice to spend time thinking about things that give you the right attitudes in life."
Hmm.
But we all only practice at it. It's like the Buddhists. They never succeed, but we always practice.
Yeah, I've got some thoughts about that. It's kind of an amazing thing, though. I think that I've known you, uh, briefly, and we have been Facebook friends, um, but I always come away from a conversation with you feeling much better, and it's an interesting and wonderful trait and characteristic, and a lot of
Thank you
things that
very much.
a lot of things that people do easily, you think they just do. Like if you watch Roger, getting back to tennis, if you watch Roger Federer play, it's like, oh, I see that you just do that, thing, and that's why the ball goes right in, and none of the kind of the practice gets shown. If you're, in the Olympics, whatever, doing that one thing, and I'm not sure how much practice goes into it, but it's certainly welcome to be part of and to watch. And I think it ripples out. I think people who will have watched our episodes will get a sense of that, knowing you better. So let me just come to some of the kind of scripted questions I had here.
Sure.
And to be fair, we had a conversation earlier to generate some of these, so they're not, they're not scripted out of the blue. But these are things that actually I have been wondering about. I'm just on a base. Do you feel unlucky about having had 4 episodes of cancers? I mean, 2 separate cancers. Do you feel as if there's, something you did to warrant this, and if so, what was it? And I guess, does it, wear you down in any way?
Oh, I don't feel lucky. So, I think that there's probably some lifestyle choices and things like this that I've gotten into that played a role. I tend to think that I believe personally in the theory that you can take so much toxins into the body and things start going awry. I've had summer jobs where I've been mixing plastic in plastics factories and coming home covered with a half inch of poly and breathing it and things like this.
Mm-hmm.
What effect did that have on the lungs? Who knows?
Right.
But I think that there's. I was never a smoker, so that's one of the big lessons that everybody said. Oh well, you've got lung problems. You were a smoker. No, I was never a smoker, but I did have acid reflux, and I
Right.
ignored it. And I didn't think it was any big deal. We're going to talk about that later because
Mm-hmm.
I learned a lot about what that means from you.
Right. So I would just take a minute. Some of the things that you say now, spark my interest, and that's been all along with the Cancer Project. Part of my impetus in writing this is to take away some of the sensibilities that we bring these things on ourselves. And this will be one of the major chapters of what will be a book coming from our video series, so far with the same name, Dodging Cancer. But there are things that do cause cancer, and there are cancers that are pretty much exclusively from the things we do. I would say skin cancer and lung cancer are related to things we do. And in that case, sun burning and smoking. But I would say, the vast majority of almost every other cancer you get, depends on which, are just kind of things that happen over time, and it'd be hard to have a life without having done things. And of course, we all get older, and things do happen over time. But that's another day for another topic. Did you feel as if there was a causation of the sarcoma? Did you feel that was indicative of behavior or actions on your part?
No, exactly the opposite. I felt very blessed. I was living in Michigan, and all the darn ice and such. I came out of church, and my feet shot out from under me, and I fell backwards, and I slammed down onto the ice, and my neck was so painful. I had them take images of my neck, and they found the what they said was a ruptured
Wow.
disc,
Huh.
and it turned out that was the sarcoma.
Wow. So, yeah, that's actually kind of a lucky thing in a way, because I have no idea. The longer that thing sits, the more damage it does. And this is again another chapter, but maybe it's just as a teaser for people listening in now, to cover some of our other episodes. But there's a vast difference between a sarcoma and a carcinoma. They're both cancers, and they're both your cells that mutated and forgot how to turn themselves off, kind of shut up and sit down, and so forth. They're very aggressive bullies or gang lords that just want to take over the whole neighborhood or other neighborhoods on top of it. That's kind of in a way how I look at cancer. I mean, gang lords are still human, and they could be related to you, but that doesn't mean they're nice and good, and they should be, controlled and kind of corralled and so forth. But the sarcoma and carcinoma differ in one major respect, based on embryonic lines. The sarcomas come from the what's called the mesoderm, which is kind of your middle. Meso means middle, your middle skin, your middle tissue, and they are connective tissue. So mostly what they do is they connect, they grab onto things. So the behavior of a sarcoma is very different from a carcinoma, which typically can travel and go other places. But I was just curious, was that distinction brought up in your care at any point? Like, did I assume they ask when you have the esophageal carcinoma about your previous history of cancer? You brought up the sarcoma. Did they make a connection between those two events, or?
No,
Okay.
no. Matter of fact, they said that was completely unrelated, and they would set it to the side and look at the specific issue.
And how did you feel about that? Did you
I thought
feel
that
as if
they were
they're?
probably right. I mean,
Yeah.
at some point you have to say I don't know medicine, and I trust the people that do.
uh, Fair enough. I agree. I agree that they are unconnected. And I also, like to point out that the sarcomas just seem to be random affairs. Um, it's part of, living and breathing, that things can happen. And this is just one of those, kind of quirk, lightning strike kind of events. And I don't think it really, speaks to any particular causation. And
Fortunately, it was a slow growing one, and that was a great benefit.
it is, and it was. Um, so let's see here. Let's see. I have a question here. What happens when you hear initially the diagnosis of cancer? What happens?
Well, I can't speak for everybody, obviously, but for me, I went numb. Is you kind of hear it and you go, oh, wow, and you just lose all. You're kind of in la la land, and you hear what's being said, maybe 60%, and you're not picking up on some of the details. And there are parts that afterwards, because in both cases the doctor told me with my wife present, and afterwards we were able to come back and she's going, didn't you hear him say whatever? And I was like, yep, no, just didn't. That would be part of it. Another part of it is that after you hear it, you there's a you have to sit with it for a while. The one of the most interesting moments was after the surgery on the sarcoma, is they replaced part of the dura with a bovine patch. They told me, which then leaked, and so I was in the ICU, and cerebral spinal fluid is leaking out my neck. And they said the next 10 hours is going to determine if you're alive or dead. At which point I kind of slumped back into the pillows and said, God, there's nothing more I can do. It's in your hands. Please do with me as you will. And that was all I could do. There was no other option. Today I tell people that I'm a little bit odd because it's mad cow and it was a bovine patch. But
I think you actually might have gotten sensible bull. I mean, just because it's bovine doesn't necessarily mean it was a cow. It could have been a guy.
when I told,
and it could be that now you're being steered right.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry about that.
When I said this to the surgeon, he launched into this whole big technical explanation of why I couldn't have mad cow disease.
Oh, that's funny.
He didn't catch that I was teasing him at all.
That's pretty funny. Well, I don't know how to come back to a real question from that, but so I think you bring up some tips for visiting with your cancer physician or your regular physician on the diagnosis of cancer. And you wrote to me, you said intellect fails with high emotion. Who do you count on? If your questions are written down, you can ask what you were too scared to verbalize.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a lead in rather than a question, but maybe you could elaborate on that.
Well, my brother passed away from a brain tumor. And the thing that I learned from that is he ignored his physician's requests for an MRI, and things got worse and worse. And by the time he had surgery, when he had the surgery, it left him paralyzed on the left side. And my brother wished that he had just not had the surgery at that point and then had God take him. And he suffered along for several months that he otherwise wouldn't have. And so to me, I've always been concerned about making these decisions that technology has gotten so good in medicine that we can keep people alive longer than maybe they really want to be alive, or longer than God wants them to be alive. And so we need to look at things and say, is this going to substantially improve the quality of the patient's life? Or are we just keeping him alive for another couple weeks? And he's going to have a miserable existence during that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I think that being able to ask those kinds of questions, that's a difficult question to ask a doctor because nobody wants to have to answer that.
So
And
give me the question you're talking about in this case.
is this going to keep me alive with a reasonable quality of life for a substantial time, or is this just going to buy me another 2 months and I'm going to be shot full of chemicals and miserable every day? And I'm sure you've had patients who've asked you questions like that. And you can speak to how uncomfortable it is on the physician side to have to answer it, because to look somebody in the eye and tell them that is got to be rough.
So that's more in your brother's case, but in your own case, um, you're an intellect, and you mentioned that intellect fails with high emotion.
Yeah.
Um,
If
so you were
if
talking about writing your questions down. Um,
exactly, when you get a diagnosis and you're told you have 10 hours is going to make the decision between whether you're alive or not, you at that point all you can do is pray. You've lost you realize there are limits to the cognitive ability, there are limits to what we can control, and some things are just in the hands of the doctors, in the hands of God. As my mother used to say, God does miracles, but he just likes using the hands of doctors and nurses more than he used to.
Fair enough. Is there anything that you can do along the way in some of these visits that are, say, not the crucial life and death ones, but as they come along where you're having to absorb information and emotions kind of crop up to maybe obscure some of your ability to use your intellect? Do you have any kind of crib notes,
Well,
ways, maybe having somebody with you or
yeah,
taking notes or writing
absolutely.
down or tape recording? I mean, what was your pathway towards obtaining the information that you would need to, so you could kind of go over it at your leisure or have people go over it with you?
Well,
What do you recommend as a plan for people getting a diagnosis or on the verge thereof?
I recommend having somebody there who you trust, that's close to you,
Mm-hmm.
first. Second, ask the physician if it's okay to record, because if in some cases they'll say no because of what various reasons, but if it's okay to record, that gives you something to go back to.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Go in prepared to take notes. Think of it as being back in school, and it's a consultation with the professor. Is you're going to be learning some specialized information that is new to you, and so how do you best learn that?
Mm-hmm.
If you're a visual learner, you tell your doctor, can you show me on a model where how this works, or draw a picture for me?
Mm-hmm.
uh, the doctors I've encountered, they understand when people say, I get it when I see it, or I get it when I hear it. Uh, I don't think anybody's going to be offended if you take notes. I've had just the other day, a doctor said, "Don't bother with the notes." He says, "I'm taking them. I'll write down, make a Xerox copy for you, and give it
Hmm.
to you." Um, so it's a matter of knowing how you learn and being prepared to go in as a student rather than going in as a victim.
Fair enough. And to that point, let me ask you a question about not wanting to be a victim. Um, you said it's very important not to stop fighting, and as well to pray and accept the support of others. Um, what are your resources to maintain? I mean, it's easy to say things. I forget what the quote is. I mean, one quote is, "There are no atheists in a foxhole." When battle comes, people find themselves in different mindsets. How do you uh, how do you see, the your I'm going to give you a special super ability. How do you see, as having gained your kind of, well, we'll call your equilibrium, how do you keep and maintain that tool through what can be a very arduous pathway? And I'm going to follow that up with another question in a little bit, just for put this question in context. Kind of your comparison of when you had to switch clinics. I think from Mayo Clinic or Cleveland Clinic to MGH. So that required a little bit of strength and kind of looking above the fray. So that's going to be the second question. So I don't want to confuse you too much. So the first question is, how do you keep your kind of special power equilibrium so that you're able to absorb things and have the wherewithal to, keep yourself in fighting form while you're taking a lot of kind of body blows, almost literally.
Well, there's two parts to it. One, uh, you need to be sure that you're operating on clear, real information,
Hmm.
because once you leave, the head will play tricks on you, and you'll think you heard things that you maybe didn't hear. And so there's a suggestion you made, which I have done myself, that I think is wonderful. And that's to call back and say, "I'd really like an appointment with the physician's assistant or the physician's nurse to go over what the doctor told me." And to be able to do that, they sometimes have a little more time than the doctor to explain the details. And by doing it a few days later, you're more prepared to absorb the information. That's just a possibility. But to directly answer the question, I think that the support system that you have is critical. That I had a very strong, powerful community of friends and the church and family, but that leads to a question of who do you tell and how open are you about your cancer, and we can come back to that. But I had people praying for me at the Catholic Church and at the Reformed Temple. I had was on the list at both places for prayers. Uh,
That's a whole nother video that I find fascinating. We'll
I've
maybe
done a
come into
lot of
that.
interfaith work, and I had people praying for me from just about every denomination you can think of.
That's
And
really, frankly, a marvelous thing.
I think it played a role. And one of the things that people forget is that sometimes people have a need to pray for someone else. That it's not just about us.
Hmm.
And that when I went to church one Sunday, I thought, I really don't want to go. And I got there, and as I was walking along, this young man came up who I taught and volunteered and taught ethics at the school. He came up and said, "Oh, Mr. Masty, it's great to see you here. You just made my day. It's good to know that you practice what you preach and you're here at church." And I thought, I didn't want to come at all. But here I came and did some good for this young man.
Yeah.
I think that applies to letting people pray for us.
No, that's an interesting point. So I no, I appreciate that, because sometimes, I mean, half the battle sometimes is getting up and ready and getting dressed, and uh, we've had a little bit of a pajama year for a lot of people, where people might have gone days without putting on some of their better clothes and so forth. I think uh, mean, I don't want to sound silly, but one of my favorite shows, especially in comparison to what I thought it was going to be. I mean, a lot of shows you come into, you've heard, great things and so forth, but I had, heard a fair amount of kind of ridicule about the Dog Whisperer, and it was kind of hokey and silly. And I have to tell you that it's been, I think it's been off the air for a while, but when I watched the Dog Whisperer, I was really quite taken with his, I guess, behavioral approach to, our fine, furry friends. And what I thought was going to be a silly show was actually really deep. I mean, I think there's an what I'll call an iterative function. That is something that goes back and forth and kind of contributes to itself. So the more you do this, then the more this happens. The more this happens, the more that first thing happens as well. So it becomes kind of like a cycle effect.
Self-fulfilling prophecy. Yes.
Yeah, kind of a virtuous circle or a cycle. And one of the, I didn't watch, I'm not encyclopedic about this show, but I watched a number of them, and he's got a bunch of mopey and kind of bad behaving dogs in one way or another. People bring to him, and in one case there was a dog, and he couldn't look at any other dog, and he's really shy and terrified, and he's peeing around the house and all this kind of stuff. And he did basically a posture change for the dog. And so he raised this, maybe I think it was a Weimaraner dog. He raised the tail up while he held the leash. So the tail had to be up. And when the dog's tail is up, he has to, it's kind of a different mood for them. They do that when they're in a mood, but when the tail's up, it kind of induces that mood as well. It's a little bit like the thing about smiling, and the world smiles with you. I mean, you can wake up miserable and you smile, maybe forced smile, whatever, but then you laugh at it and so forth, and it actually does change your mood. And I think some of what you're talking about, I mean, I think part of the power of prayer is supernatural, say, but part of it is that you're actually working on those kind of, not quite the smile muscles, but you're working on the hope muscles, and you're kind of keeping yourself in fighting form to be receptive to reasonable and good things that can happen, and certainly allowing other people the opportunity to show sympathy, as opposed to sitting up in your jammies, feeling miserable about yourself. And that's not a question. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Well, I think that you're absolutely right, and it's there's different ways of taking this, but you can also go the other way. You can be a surly, miserable SOB, and you'll only notice the other surly, bad things around you. And so I've had more people in medicine who have gone out of their way to help me because I was nice to them, secretaries, scheduling people. I traveled to Boston for treatment, and I told them, look, I can't afford to stay in the hotel and wait for the duration of between tests. And they said, oh, well, let us get involved. We'll make all the tests happen in 3 days. Just marvelous, wonderful people that had I not presented the problem and told them what it was, they never would have known to help.
Yeah, that's a funny thing. We spend so much time on the internet, we might think that the world is kind of a blip, 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 kind of computerized choice algorithm, and that we just want to do this. I mean, the second I want something, I'm missing a piece on my car, I just kind of find the tool, the item number, boom, 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 it's delivered 3 days later. But with kind of the bigger, broader spectrum of personal choices in medicine, where the person is not quite a computer, and the part number is not quite at the store, Amazon and so forth. A lot of it has to be kind of created, and a lot of the mechanisms for what is the best thing to do are still in process, and we can't necessarily experiment on people and so forth. So I think that the being nice part certainly kind of gives people, other people, and it's not to say they would be not as good to you if you were not as nice, but I think it helps broaden people's perspective and how they're going to think they're going to help you. And I think it helps their, maybe a little bit of their creative and imaginative juices, and probably helps you on a very, basic level if and when you wind up in the hospital. I think the level of nursing care is probably a little bit higher, certainly more pleasant when you vice versa are pleasant to people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is that a Barbara Streisand song? People.
Yes, Barbara Streisand about the baker, people who need people.
Yeah, are the luckiest people in the world. Well, the people who help people are maybe the second luckiest. It's hard to grade, and vice versa. So,
Let me take one more question from you and we'll wrap it up for this bout and then start another one
okay,
afterwards.
all right, perfect. Um, so I guess I have in mind, and I maybe gave a teaser about your peregrinations. You're moving from one clinic to another to get a certain type of care, and how you manage to um, weigh the choices and figure out which way you were going to go.
Well, it's kind of an odd story in that esophageal cancer was found by my gastroenterologist, and he sent me to a facility, and the guy walked in with his students behind him, and he gave a lecture about esophageal cancer that I understood very little, and he went through about 30 feet of the paper on the patient bed, drawing on it. And he said, well, we'll take your stomach out and we'll put it in your neck, and we're going to pull your intestine up and we're going to connect it and we're going to do. And my wife and I were absolutely horrified. And he then said, I said, I have several questions. He said, there'll be time for that the morning of surgery.
Huh.
And he walked out, and we walked out. He called later and said, I think maybe I rushed things and was a little bit too focused on the students. And I said, well, have a good day, And I called Moffitt, and they said, we do those. We've done 5 of them, but you really want to go where they do them every day. And we don't know that you need that. Go up to a place like Mass General in Boston. So it was by asking people, by going to other sources, asking for referrals, asking how often they did it. No offense, Dr. Bach, but when you have a surgeon, you don't care how nice a guy he is. You care that he can do the job and he can
Mm-hmm.
do it well. And his sense of humor really doesn't matter much at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So you go where they've done the most and they're most experienced, and roll with it.
Okay, fair enough. But there seemed to be a little bit of the opposite there with the first doctor doing, the drawing on the paper for the students. Was there something about his personality, the way he kind of brushed you off, or did you know enough technically that you knew that procedure wasn't the one you wanted? And what's the procedure you ultimately got? Did you get your stomach put into your chest
Well,
cavity and so forth?
it's interesting is that I found him abrasive. I found him just, I didn't like it. I thought he wasn't taking time to answer the questions. Uh, and afterwards, when I got to Boston, they said there are 5 procedures that can be done to help you. That's one of the 5. But our job is to pick the right one. These are the other 4. And this is the one we recommend, which was doing it with scopes. And turns out now, down the road, had he gone in and done it, the new studies show that the cancer would have spread even more quickly.
Hmm.
So I'm very fortunate that I had the sense to walk, and I figure it's divine providence that caused me to walk at the time.
Right. So I'm going to let you go in just a minute or two, and we'll try to get this second episode because I find it fascinating. Um, but so just with that nugget or that scene, A, B, testing kind of, you had first doctor, the second hospital. Is there a recommendation? I mean, you sounds like you in a way had kind of the right sensibility,
You have to
but
trust your gut to a degree.
you didn't quite have all the facts that the MGH gave you later on. Is there any information now that you would have done differently with, we'll call him Dr. A, the first doctor, based on having seen
I
doctors?
called him Dr. A at the time, but that was another matter.
That's clever, and we're not going to discuss that. So do you have any kind of advice or thoughts on that scenario? Should it happen to other people?
Trust your gut. Look for, don't be afraid to get a second opinion. The guys who are brilliant in the field are approachable. Matter of fact, if the guy's not approachable, I tend to avoid him because if he's so into his own thing that he isn't paying attention to the patients, I run the other way. I want somebody who is going to focus on what my problem is for that amount of time. And that's, you can get to the top people in the world if you are persistent and you find out who they are. If you call and you're nice to the secretaries, if you come in like a bulldog, you're not going to get anywhere.
Fair enough.
But you have to also make yourself memorable. It's a little bit like being a salesman. You've got to sell your case to the to get in on their rotation.
Fair enough. So, in the interest of time and relaxation, I'm going to cut you loose, and I very much appreciate your spending the time today. Do you have any closing words for us?
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. So, as a teaser for our audience, we have great stuff in store. And Tom, if you liked what Tom spoke about today, please let us know. We love compliments. But we also like and take criticism. And I'm happy to learn from your thoughts. And if you have any concepts of directions which we should travel and things you'd like to hear, please let us know. So I'm going to call it an afternoon, and I very much appreciate your spending the time with us today, Tom. Thank you.